So this is part 2.
Part 2
of
part
Dyatlov. Alright, so part 2 of Dyatlov Pass.
We're coming at you with the part 2 that shouldn't have had to exist, but had to exist because it was past Mayara's bedtime.
That's
and, true. We would have had like a 2-hour and 45-minute episode or something like that.
Yeah, probably.
Which maybe y'all are into, but it wasn't a day for it. It was late. It was late at night.
Late.
The zombies were coming and it was very late.
I was sleepy.
Yeah, you were. I was worried that I would be a podcast of one and you'd be snoring next to me and I'd have to turn your microphone off and just pretend you had no more thoughts and finish it by myself.
Yeah. I agree with everything she says.
Yeah, I would have had to do a ventriloquist moment. And
yeah.
Tried to mimic your voice and trick people into thinking you weren't snoring next to me. Would have been really awkward.
It would have been
for
really
everybody
awkward.
Involved.
Yeah. So, I'm Miara.
I'm Morgan.
And we are Mysteriosities. So we left off at the theories.
So here's what I accidentally realized is I think I was half asleep because it actually wasn't the end of the investigation. I still had one tiny more section. So we're going to have to go over that. Sorry everybody, it wasn't broken down as smoothly as I had thought when I was half asleep and thought the word investigation and theory was the same word. So, yeah.
The struggle.
So we're starting at a little bit of the end of the investigation and then what's happened since then, just overall.
Okay.
Just random things that have happened since then. And then we're going to do the theories.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, if we had done that better, I would have gone through all of that and then we'll just stop right at the theories, but that's okay.
I think it was the perfect length, though, the hour and 17 minutes.
We can't win them all. I also wanted to correct myself on one thing that I looked up after the fact and clarify another thing that I looked up after the fact. So do you remember when I was talking about Yuri Krivonashenko?
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about how his favorite song was I Love You Life and his mom...
Yeah. She put that thing on.
She put a plate with the engraving.
Yeah.
And I said that basalt was a piece of string.
Yeah.
That's because in my head I thought that she was hanging it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So basalt's actually a rock.
Oh.
So she attached it to a rock. I'm assuming kind of a balancing thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in my head, I just thought she was hanging it, so I didn't even look up what basalt was and just assumed it was a type of string to use to hang
Now
things.
that you say that, I feel like I remember that in when we talked about geology.
Yeah, and so I felt stupid when I looked it up, and I was like, oh, okay, so someone's going to be like, you bitch, that's a rock. So I wanted to correct myself and
I kept thinking you said bath salt.
Which is also a rock, so...
Not really.
Really, we should have known.
That's true.
So I wanted to correct that. And then do you remember when I was talking about how I thought there's people dating within the group?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to say, because I looked it up. So remember when I said that there was the guy who ran at a bear?
Bear, yeah.
Yuri Doroshenko, who ran at a bear. Yuri and Xena used to date. And on the trip, Xena and Igor were dating.
Oh, that's awkward.
And it wasn't actually, it said that they were all kind of cool and it was fine. But I just wanted to clarify that because I briefly brought it up.
So maybe it was one of those, we're better off as friends type of thing.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, since I looked that up, I wanted to throw that in there since I vaguely brought up the dating, but I didn't say who and what. So yeah, Xena and Yuri were dating because she was the one that was there when he ran at a bear. Right. And then on this trip in the Ural Mountains, Xena was dating Igor.
Okay.
So those were two things that I wanted to clarify from last time that I looked up. And now we can go. Now that I'm ready. Now that I brought that up. So, to refresh everybody's memory, at the end of last episode, we had just finished going over medical examinations for everybody. And now we're really quickly going to go in just briefly to some more of the investigation, and then we'll go from there, okay? So, you remember how I talked about the Mansi or the Mansi people?
Yeah, the indigenous people.
Yeah, the ones that named that mountain, and they were in the area. So they were reindeer herders that were local to the area, and for a very brief period of time, people thought that they had attacked and murdered the group for like being on their lands. It's mostly because there was proof of a dwelling in the vicinity of where they were, like where their tent was. And there's also like signs on the trail. They have like symbols that they carve into trees and whatnot. And there's actually photos if you go on the website that I linked last time and look at photos from all of their cameras. You can see them like looking at like the carvings and whatnot.
Ask me if I'm surprised that they're blaming the indigenous people.
Yes. I know. And also, like, they wrote about them in some of their diaries. Like, Xena wrote in her diary, and this is in quotes, "We often see Mansi signs on the trail. I wonder what they write about." And then another hiker recorded in a diary, but they're not sure whose diary it is. Mansi writings appear on trees. All sorts of obscure, mysterious characters. So they were obviously seeing those signs that they were around, which is why the people jumped on that theory. And there were actually several Mansi people who were interrogated, but it just didn't pan out because there was no reason, first of all, to think that they were killed by anybody. There was no footprints of anybody other than the 9 people that they knew were there, and there was not a lot of sign of like hand-to-hand struggle. Obviously, we mentioned some bruised knuckles on like 2 people, but that was it as far as like fighting.
Like, yeah.
And basically, it's been very, very debunked as baseless and just people misunderstanding the Mansi culture and rituals, which is like you said. It's like when people don't understand something, they're so quick to be like, well, they murdered them. It was them.
Yeah.
That's what always happens.
That's what always happens.
But that was very debunked and called like, no, like that didn't happen.
Right.
There's no proof of it.
Well, good.
They're like the Mansi people have never had issues with like.
How do you spell that?
Mansi.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying Mansi or Mansi, but I just feel like Mansi kind of has better vibes. But please tell me if I'm wrong. I could look it up, but I've looked up so many things. And this is the last time I'm bringing it up, so.
No, I think it's.
Mansi just saying sounds right to me.
I was just curious because I was going to like look them up afterwards.
Oh, yeah. Mansi. So, also in the investigation, do you remember when we were talking about the average temperatures?
Yeah, like 6 below.
Yeah, well, the temperature was very low at the time of this incident. It was considered to be around -25 to -35 Celsius or -13 to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. So, it was cold. And there was a storm blowing around.
Which means that's even colder.
Yeah, so it was very, very cold at that time.
Like wind chill is a thing.
Yeah, and so then I'm really briefly going to go over the journalists and specifically what they were reporting on from the available parts of the inquest that they were able to have access to.
Right.
So this is some stuff that we've already gone over, but it's just I wanted to put like what was publicly available from the journalists at the time. So they said that 6 of the group died of hypothermia and 3 of fatal injuries, and that there were no indication of any other people nearby on Hayat Sayok.
That was good.
Thank you. Apart from them, it was only considered to be, they were the only ones there that there was any proof. Obviously that the tent had been ripped open from within. They had that information. The victims died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. I'm assuming we're talking about, in this instance, the first 5 that were found.
Yeah.
Because obviously we know that the last 4 were found months later.
Right.
And I feel like those people probably had way less access to food.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be strange if all of them died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. If
they found them so much later, doesn't the body do?
True, maybe, I don't know.
I don't really know what
like stomach contents and
and also with the cold too. That's a factor. So I don't know.
So it doesn't specify, but I would guess that's referring to the first 5 bodies that were found.
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
and that traces from the camp showed that all group members left on their own accord on foot. And then it also, they did know, and the journalists did know that there was radiation found on the clothing of Kololatov and Dubinina's clothing.
Sketch.
And it was noted that this was an unnaturally high level of radiation. And you also have to keep in mind that because the bodies had been exposed to running water for months, it had probably been a lot more originally that was sort of washed away with all the months of them being in water. So it was already high, but a radiological expert testified it was probably a lot higher at first. So that's kind of sus. Pretty suspicious.
Sketchy.
Yes, very sketchy. And then also journalists reported more to dispel again the Mansi people being responsible. It was stated that the fatal injuries could not have been caused by people because, as we spoke about before, the force of impact was more similar to a car crash. So kind of to be like, yeah, it really wasn't these people. It was not the Mansi people at all.
It was the bioengineered yeti with a baseball bat.
Exactly. Obviously, we all know that that's what happened. So that's what the journalists were reporting at the time. And then also Yuri Kuntsevich was a guy who later became the head of the Dyatlov Foundation, and he attended 5 of the hikers' funerals.
Was he the 10th one?
No.
So there's another Yuri?
First of all, this Yuri is spelled Y-U-R-Y, and the other Yuris are spelled Y-U-R-I. But this is, how many Johns John, Bob, Jim?
I know.
Everyone in the world has a name that's like has common names like that.
Yeah, except me.
I meant every country and like culture.
I know,
and people who named things have common names.
Do you remember Yaroslav, the door dasher?
No, you've asked me this before.
He was a very tall Russian man.
Okay, yeah, you've asked me about him before.
That's who I think of when I think of Yaroslav.
Okay, regardless of Yaroslav, the DoorDash driver. So this Yuri ended up being the head of the Dyatlov Foundation, and he actually had attended 5 of the hikers' funerals when he was younger. And he recalled that all of their skin had a deep brown tan. So the color of the skin is something that is widely debated because they were all they were called like really dark. They were called like really orange sometimes. Like their skin was a strange color. Is that
like the radioactive stuff?
I don't know. We don't
know.
Like
The Simpsons.
I don't know.
That's what happened to them. That's why they're yellow. Nuclear power plant. Power plant.
Is that why? Is that a real thing?
I don't know. I think so. I'm not a big Simpsons fan.
You referenced it really like you were, but I'm
not.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it.
I feel like I've heard that.
Could be. I just kind of thought it was just a thing that they didn't talk about, and they were just...
Well, I know Homer works for a nuclear power plant.
Well, yeah.
And I think that they were exposed, and that's why they're yellow.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Okay.
It's canon. It's Simpson canon. You heard it here first.
Yep.
So, also about Yuri, just a little fun fact. So, he actually still leads tours to the Dyatlov Pass, and he told... whoever wrote this article that I think I've linked, but I did read a lot of articles, so I'm going to have to make sure I find it and link it. He said that Russians generally favor 2 theories, the first one being that the skiers died because they stumbled into an area with secret weapons that were being tested.
Okay.
And the second theory that Russians tend to favor was that the party was killed by mercenaries, probably American spies. So generally... they're favoring, like, this wasn't natural, something suspicious went down.
Yeah. And some type of government.
Yeah, whether it was the Russian government
or us.
Which, fair.
Fair.
But at the time, the official conclusion was that the group members had died because of a, quote, compelling natural force, and the inquest officially ceased in May of 1959 as a result of an absence of a guilty party, because basically the inquest is just trying to prove, like, did someone do this? And then when they prove that No, it wasn't a person. It was just a thing that happened. They could close it. So it was closed in May of 1959, and the files at that point were sent to a secret archive.
Sketchy.
Secret archives are sketchy.
Mm-hmm.
They're very sketchy.
It's like Area 51, man.
Yeah.
Government hiding shit they don't want us to know.
Yeah, let's just tell...
Or maybe that they think that we can't handle.
So
maybe there is bioengineered yetis, and they're like, the public can't handle this.
Well...
Especially if it has a baseball bat.
Look, I feel like...
That baby's got one hell of a swing.
I hate you. Look, I don't think if the Russian government has bioengineered yetis, I don't think they're keeping it from the public because they can't handle it. I think they're keeping it from the public because they bioengineered yetis.
Yeah.
If there were real yetis, I think that'd be like aliens, where they'd be like,
Right.
nah, people can't handle that.
That's
but obviously, they don't want people to know if they're making yeti.
That's true. Making yetis.
Making some yetis. So, since then, that's my next category. It's called Since Then. And so, we're going to go through that, and then we'll be on the theories, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Yuri Doroshenko, Zina Zolomagrino... I wanted to do it so fast. Like, I'm going to do it so fast, I'm going to get it. I got to do it slow again. You're just going to have to cut it.
Kolmogorova.
Oh,
not that one.
Zolmogorova.
Oh, it's
Zina
okay.
Zolmogorova, Igor Dyatlov, and Rastim Slobodin were laid to rest in the Myhanovesko Cemetery, and Yuri Krivonishenko was buried in the Invanovsko
No, that sounds good.
Invanovsko Cemetery, and they were buried on March 9th and 10th of 1959.
Okay.
And just an interesting kind of sus and sketchy note is there was an interview that was done with Yuri Doroshenko's sister, and she revealed that men came to their door in uniform and told her parents that there had been an incident, and they told them to come with them. So her mom and her aunt left to go with them. They got to, like, the area, like, where the Ural Mountains were, you know. Not, like, up in the mountains, but, you know, like...
Right.
The city. Or the village. I don't know exactly. Wherever they went. And they got there and basically had to go right to the funeral. Yuri was already in a coffin, and she said she didn't recognize him at all.
Wow.
It's kind of crazy that they got there and they were already in a coffin, ready to go to the funeral. Like,
right.
Like, they're ready to get them buried.
Yeah.
Is my opinion of that.
Yeah, no, it sounds sketchy.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
So then on May 12th, 1959, Ludmila Dupanina, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Tapiopregno were buried in the same cemetery as Yuri, Zina, and Igor and Rastim, which was the Myhailovsky Cemetery. And then Sasha, or Simeon Zolotarov, his funeral was delayed a few days after the 12th so that his mother could attend because she couldn't get there by the 12th. And he was buried in the same cemetery as Yuri Krivnodoshenko, which is the Invanovsky Cemetery. Another interesting note is the last 4 bodies were buried in closed coffins, unlike the ones found in February, which were buried in open coffins.
Well, I mean...
No, because open coffins were the usual practice to this day. Basically, everyone did open coffins unless it was a military death. It was always open coffins. But theirs were closed.
Well, yeah, because they were mutilated.
I know, but I just think it's an interesting note. But I mean, you're right. They were, like, missing eyeballs and stuff.
Yeah, so they're not gonna...
But eyes, if your eyelids are closed, you can't tell you're missing eyeballs.
Yeah, but the one girl's face was smashed.
I know. I just was trying to... I just felt suspicious, but I know you're just using logic. I know. You're not wrong. They were the ones that had a lot of soft tissue damage, so it is like very fair.
Of everything, that makes sense.
You're like, that's not suspicious.
Right. To me, it's not.
Which, fair. And then in 1962, next to the graves in the Myhailovsky Cemetery, there was a monument erected with pictures of all 9 members of the group. And in August of 1963, on the pass of the Hoyatsyonk mountain, a group led by Valentin Yakomenko set a memorial plaque saying, "In memory of those who left and did not return, we name this pass after the Dyatlov group." So it's been called the Dyatlov Pass ever since then, which is nice.
Because he was the leader.
Yeah. And then in 1999, that's when the Dyatlov Foundation was founded in Yekaterinburg. And that was with the help of the Ural State Technical University, where most of them attended. And that was led by that other Yuri. And that had the aim to continue the investigation of the case and to maintain the Dyatlov Museum to preserve the memory of the dead hikers.
So can you go there now?
I believe it's still open.
Okay.
So, and then on July 1st, 1916, a memorial plaque was inaugurated in Solikamsk, but it was dedicated to Yuri Yudin, which was the sole survivor from the group.
Right.
Because he died in 2013 from an illness at 75 years old.
Wow.
So they put a plaque for him up.
That's still a pretty decently long life.
75 if you were born in the
back in the
20s or
that time
30s.
period. That's pretty good. Yeah.
That's not bad. Okay, so you remember Sasha
Yes.
Zolotarov, who's the oldest one in the group,
and he wasn't their friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his remains were exhumed in 2018 because of an initiative of journalists of a Russian tabloid newspaper called Komsomolskaya Pravda.
Are they allowed to do that?
Well, they didn't exhume it, but
they got permission from somebody to do it?
Or no,
like
not
family?
Not that they did it, but just that what they were researching gave them reason to exhume it.
Yeah, but doesn't that... Well, that's in America. I was going to say, doesn't the next of kin have a say in that?
Well, they may have agreed. I'm just saying that...
okay.
Whatever that tabloid had, the information...
It just seemed weird, because it was a tabloid, exhuming a body.
No, the tabloid didn't exhume the body. It was exhumed on the initiative of what they
Right.
What they'd been reporting on. It gave them reason to exhume the body.
Okay.
Not that they had anything to actually do with the exhuming.
Yeah.
Just what they were reporting on.
Right.
Gave them reason to exhume him. So when they did DNA analysis on Sasha's remains, it did not reveal any similarities to the DNA of his living relatives. And so...
Maybe he was just adopted.
Well, they would have known that. His family would have known that, probably. Well, I guess
it was a big old secret.
And I guess in 2018, his parents would have been dead, so...
Right.
Perhaps.
Could have been a family secret.
Perhaps. But basically, the point of that was that although the reconstruction of the face from the exhumed skull matched post-war photographs of Sasha, journalists expressed suspicions that another person was hiding under his name after World War II.
Oh.
So, that's just a little suspicious tidbit. But he also could have just been adopted.
What if,
he had an evil twin?
No, what if he was,
a bioengineered yeti?
No. What if he, went undercover and stole his identity, that guy's identity, because he knew something about whatever government, and so then he went on that hike, and that's how they got him, and the other people were just collateral damage.
You're kind of on track with one of the theories that I'll get to later. Sort of. You're on a track, so we will get to that theory. But the last bit of sort of news related to this case is just in February 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation into the incident. But the only explanations that they were examining was an avalanche, a slab avalanche, or a hurricane. So they didn't open it thinking anything suspicious had happened. They just reopened it.
What's a slab avalanche?
I'll tell you because it's in here in my notes.
I was I don't even know what that is.
Exactly. I didn't either. That's why it has its own little section. So that's the end of the news of everything that's happened. And now we're going into theories.
Okay.
So we're starting with the main theory and also what would be considered by conspiracy theorists, obviously, as a very boring theory, which was an avalanche.
No.
What?
There's no way.
Oh, you're saying no, it's not an avalanche?
No,
Well,
it's not an avalanche.
we're gonna go into it. I have a fair amount of stuff on the avalanche.
Like, where'd their
theory.
eyeballs go?
Snow just sweep them right out of their eyeballs.
Right?
Out of their eye
That makes
sockets.
sense. Okay.
So,
They would have found eyeballs. Unless, like, a wolf ate it or something. I don't know.
not
Or a
wolf.
yeti.
Okay, so, like I
Maybe
said,
the yeti didn't kill them. They just ate their eyeballs.
it's like a fun little snack.
Yeah. Who knows?
So, like I said, Russian authorities reopened the case in February of 2019. But on July 11th of 2020, Andrei Kuryakov, who was the deputy head of the Urals Federal District, announced that an avalanche was the official cause of death for the Dyatlov group. And later there would be like independent computer simulations and analysts by Swiss researchers, which we'll go into later, who also suggested avalanches. So there's a lot of research into the avalanche theories.
Yeah, because they're trying to cover something up. That's what they're doing. That's why the government went back and opened it so that they could make people stop asking questions, because they're like, no, this is exactly what happened. There's an answer now. See ya. Bye. Nice try. Lies.
Okay.
Sorry, I just got fired up.
No, you're okay. So there is a reporter named Douglas Preston who wrote for the New Yorker, and he summarized the report of the avalanche theory that got closed. And I'm just going to read his summary because it's easier than trying to summarize the report myself. Because
Right.
I looked at it, it was long, and I didn't want to. So this is Douglas Preston's summary of that report. It says, the most appealing aspect of Kuryakov's scenario is that Dyatlov's party's actions no longer seem irrational. The snow slab, according to Green, would probably have made loud cracks and rumbles as it fell across the tent, making an avalanche seem imminent. He noted that although the skiers made an error in the placement of their tent, everything else they did subsequently was textbook. They conducted an emergency evacuation to ground that would be safe from an avalanche. They took shelter in the woods. They started a fire. They dug a snow cave. Had they been less experienced, they might have remained near the tent, dug it out, and survived. But avalanches are by far the biggest risk in the mountains in winter. And the more experience you have, the more you fear them. The skiers' expertise doomed them. So that was the summary of the report, basically.
Sounds like a bunch of bullshit.
And I agree. I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot of people who agree with it, because I'm going to go into another explanation from an American author named Benjamin Radford. And he said he thought the group woke up in a panic and cut their way out of the tent, either because an avalanche had covered the entrance to their tent or because they were scared that an avalanche was imminent. He said better to have a potentially repairable slit in a tent than risk being buried alive in it under tons of snow. They were poorly clothed because they had been sleeping and ran to the nearby woods where trees would help slow oncoming snow. In the darkness of night, they got separated into 2 or 3 groups. One made a fire, hence the burned hands, while the others tried to return to the tent to recover their clothing since the danger had passed. But it was too cold, and they all froze to death before they could locate their tent in the darkness. At some point, some of the clothes may have been recovered or swapped from the dead, but at any rate, the group of 4 whose bodies was most severely damaged were caught in an avalanche and buried under 4 meters of snow, more than enough to account for, quote, compelling natural force, the medical examiner described. Dubonina's tongue was likely removed by scavengers and ordinary predators. So that's another...
What about their eyeballs?
Probably like
Predators?
all of them, they would just say was predators.
No, it's bullshit.
Yeah. So to continue more pro-avalanche theories, there was a review of the 1959 investigation in 2015, and that went on from 2015 to 2019. It was made by experienced investigators from the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation on the request of the family. So this investigation confirmed that the weather was very harsh, with wind speeds up to 67 miles per hour, and with a snowstorm with temperatures reaching, as we said, like negative 40 degrees Celsius. I think that's what we said before, but the just was cold.
Yeah, very cold.
And that the harsh weather played a critical role in the events of the tragic night, which they reconstructed as follows. So on February 1st, they arrive at Hayatseong Mountain and erect a large 9-person tent on an open slope without any natural barriers such as forests, which we talked about before. Some people said, why wouldn't they have gone to the woods to start with? Why did they just put their tent up in the middle, like, of an open area?
Right.
And then on the day and a few preceding days that there had been a heavy snowfall beforehand with strong wind and frost. So they, like, dug into the slope to put their tent up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So this reconstruction states that weakened the snow base. And so during the night, the snowfield above the tent started to slide down slowly under the weight of the new snow that was falling. So that gradually pushed on the tent fabric, starting from the entrance. So when they woke up and started an evacuation in a panic, only some people were able to put on warm clothes. And with the entrance blocked, they had to escape through a hole they cut in the tent and then descend the slope to find a safe space from the avalanche at the forest border.
Wouldn't you sleep in your clothes?
I know you've already said that, because
Like,
same thing you said about shoes.
Yeah, like, you're not gonna take your clothes off to your underwear when you're camping on the ground when it's cold with snow.
I agree, but I don't know if they had, like, you know, like Igor had made that stove. Maybe they had the stove on in the camp to, like, keep it warm. Like, there's, like,
Yeah,
stuff
but I
you
feel
keep
like
on
that's
in it.
really dangerous.
But there are things that you can have on in a tent to keep it warm.
In the 50s?
I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there.
But
I know, like, generally speaking, you can keep, like...
Well, like,
tent's pretty warm.
nowadays, yeah, but, like, back then, I don't know.
That's true. It could have been nothing, and then you'd think
And,
they would
like,
be cold enough to...
Well,
keep their
because,
clothes on.
like, I would think, like, they probably used what? For the heat, like, did they use
Gas?
kerosene?
I mean, probably.
But kerosene's, like, extremely flammable. And I feel like, I don't know, I just don't know.
You're thinking there's nothing on in the tent to keep them warm because it'd be too
No.
flammable, and so why wouldn't they sleep with their clothes on? Because wouldn't they be cold?
Yeah.
You're not wrong. I mean, you're fair. It's the same reason you said you'd sleep in your shoes.
Right, yeah.
But you'd also
fair.
never be in this situation.
Never.
So...
Never.
And then in this reconstruction, they also stated that the group split and that 2 of them that were the least dressed stayed by the fire and those were the ones that died first from hypothermia, and then the other 3 attempted to go back to the tent to possibly get sleeping bags or clothes because they were slightly better dressed to, like, go back, even though they also were not adequately dressed. And since they were found at various distances from the campfire, it suggested that they fell exhausted at different times while trying to climb in deep snow and a cold snowstorm to get back to the tent.
That makes sense. That part of it.
Yeah, I do feel like the 3 bodies, like, that were found heading back to the tent were definitely trying to get back to get supplies.
Yeah.
From whatever had happened. And then the remaining 4 were equipped with the warm clothing and footwear. They were the, you know, best dressed, as we said before.
Yeah.
We're trying to find a better camping place in the forest further down the slope. And this theory posits that they basically fell into a snow hole formed above the stream. And that's why they were so much further down. And then basically they said that weather and a lack of experience from the group leader in such bad conditions contributed to what happened. And that after the snowslide, it was a mistake for the group to split up rather than just building a temporary camp and trying to all survive the night. So,
I could also see that thing, like, where one person wants to do this and the other person wants to do this, so then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They go their separate ways.
Those are all of the pro-avalanche theories and kind of the reconstructions of what they thought went down.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're going to really quickly get into the contradictory evidence that people give to say, no, an avalanche doesn't make sense. I'm sure you'll love it since you don't think an avalanche makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
I'm excited.
the location of the incident had no obvious signs of there having been an avalanche. It would have left patterns and debris distributed over a wide area.
Right.
And the bodies that were found within a month of the event, like the first bodies that were found, were covered with a very shallow layer of snow. And if there had been an avalanche of sufficient strength to sweep away the second party, then
or to cause that much damage to their bodies.
Yeah, then the first bodies would have been swept away as well.
Right.
So it also states basically the tree line probably would have showed some sign of damages as well, because it wasn't far enough away that it wouldn't have been impacted, like trees being trampled over, whatever, if they weren't strong ass trees, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There have also been over 100 exhibitions to the region to that same region since the incident, and none of them have ever reported even conditions that might create an avalanche. So there haven't been an avalanche, and there hasn't even been the conditions for an avalanche in over 100 exhibitions since then.
Uh-huh.
And then someone did a study of the area using up-to-date terrain-related physics, some present day smart people shit. There's so much cool models and stuff like that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it revealed basically that the location was very unlikely for an avalanche to have occurred or to occur.
Nice try, government or yetis. Maybe the yetis are covering it up.
Oh, so they're
maybe
they have sufficient mental capabilities
maybe
to cover things up.
And that's how they stay unknown.
They're smart-ass yetis. There's also an analysis of the terrain and the slope that stated even if there had been a very specific avalanche that somehow found its way into being possible in an area where they say it's not, the path would have gone past the tent, and the direction it would have gone was the opposite direction of the way that the tent collapsed. So basically they're saying on the off chance that could have happened, it would have happened this way, not this way.
Yeah.
So they're saying that still doesn't even make sense. And then another anti-avalanche logic is that Dyatlov was very experienced, and Sasha, the older gentleman, was very experienced and studying for his master's certificate in ski instruction and mountain hiking, basically stating that neither of these two men would have camped anywhere near a place they thought could have an avalanche.
Right.
Basically, if they thought it was even a remote possibility, they would not have done it.
Right.
Which, valid there. Even not just those two. All of them were grade 2, like I said in part 1. They were all
on their way to grade 3.
Yeah, they were all very experienced enough that at least one of 9 people would have been like, this doesn't seem like a good area to to camp for the night.
Yeah.
But nobody did that, which definitely leads you to believe nobody thought there would be an avalanche in that area.
Right.
Then there's also the footprint patterns to consider. And all the footprints leading away from the area are not consistent with anyone running away from imminent danger. It just looks like they were walking at a normal pace.
Okay.
Anyway, so if you follow the theory that snow had started to come down on the tent and they had left before an avalanche, you wouldn't be walking then either.
Right.
You would be running if you thought there was imminent danger of an avalanche. If you had any indication, you would not be walking.
Yeah.
And also, that just makes it more weird and suspicious, too, because if the pace was walking, then why were so many of them so poorly dressed? It doesn't seem like they were in a rush. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's just strange that they were walking.
And they weren't injured.
And they weren't injured at that point either.
Yeah, at that point. So, I don't know.
And, Yuri, not the Yuri in the group, but the one that is the head of the Dyatlov Foundation that does tours.
Yeah.
So Keith McCloskey, who researched the incident for many years, he traveled to the Dyatlov Pass with Yuri in 2015, and he noted at the pass that the tent was near the ridge of where it started going up for a mountain. Right, it was too close to the ridge for any significant buildup of snow to even cause an avalanche. It wasn't a steep enough ridge at all. It was too mild, quote, for there to be an avalanche. So basically saying, I imagine the ridge was like that,
right,
and it's right there, and you're thinking well, that's not even going to do anything,
right,
is what he said when he was there. There was also no new snowfall on the night of February 1st that would have increased the weight of the snow burden, And that's what triggers avalanches, is like a weight snow and then it goes.
Yeah.
So they're saying there's no new snowfall that could have done that. And then, of course, there are the soft tissue damage of, the eyeballs and
Right.
even like the blunt force trauma, like the crushed chest and the crushed skull.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And those are not typical of avalanches because people in avalanches usually asphyxiate.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Like,
covered in tons and
they're
tons of
being
snow.
smothered.
Yeah. So those are not typical injuries of an avalanche.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
And then another little anti-avalanche information tidbit is there was a gap of at least 9 hours, according to the forensic data, of the team members cutting into the slope to put their tent up and when they left the area. So obviously that theory is stating, pro-avalanche people are stating, cutting into the slope to put their tents up destabilized it. So then how come it took 9 hours for it to finally fall, if you're following that theory? Because usually if you cut into it, it wouldn't be like 9 hours later. You know what I mean? You're destabilizing it right then and there.
Right.
And now we're moving on to 2021. So this is new news.
Okay.
Because in 2021, now this is back to pro-avalanche. These are people who did a study basically to go through the points of anti-avalanche to try to prove how it could still be possible.
Mm-hmm.
So this new model was...
I bet they work for the government.
They're actually not even from Russia. They're from Switzerland.
Oh.
Anyway, so it was led by Alexander Puzran and Johan. And he's Swiss, which makes you think of Johann. You think it's Johann?
Yeah.
Johann Gom. And Alexander was a geotechnical engineer at ETH Zurich, which is one of Switzerland's federal institutes of technology. And he published a paper, and in that paper he was explaining how, like, an avalanche can still be triggered with a gap ranging from mere minutes to several hours. So basically trying to prove the theory that they could cut into the slope and it could still take hours for that avalanche to be triggered.
Why would they cut into the slope, though?
To put their tent up.
Yeah, but like...
I don't know, I'm not a hiker, but I'm assuming there's something to do with maybe like to block the wind a little bit, or maybe it's just
and like
to
stabilize
it or whatever. But
still,
yeah, they had to do that to put the tent up. But basically, Alexander was fascinated by the incident from when he'd heard about it, so he wanted to find the answer. So that's why he teamed up with Johan and started researching. And they thought that basically if they could figure out the delay problem, like I just said, the gap of time, they thought that held the key to solving it overall. So they tried to create analytical models and simulations to replicate those hours and exactly how it happened. So like I said before, they were basically trying to counter the anti-avalanche arguments.
Yeah.
So obviously one of those arguments was that the ridge was too mild, it wasn't steep enough to have an avalanche. And they said that the topography of the mountain made it look mild, but if you actually looked closer, it was about a 30-degree slope, which is the minimum for avalanches. So technically it was steeper than it looked, basically. But with snow, it made it look a little less steep.
But that was the minimum.
Yeah, it's the minimum for...
So it's like a baby avalanche.
Baby avalanche. Reports dating back to the initial investigation also described that there was basically an underlying snow layer on the mountain that didn't clump together. So that was a weak base. So any snow on top of it could easily kind of go zoop over it. Because it wasn't it was a weak little, not packable snow.
Okay.
And then avalanche could slide over it. So basically, Alexander was basically the topography played a trick on them, made them think that it looked like a mild slope when it was actually steeper than it looked. So they thought there would be no chance of an avalanche, but it was actually steeper, and there was. So that was their first little note on the anti-avalanche theory. Then they basically were talking about how they moved into figuring out the cut and the slope, and how that could have still caused an avalanche even if it wasn't right away. So they said basically that it destabilized it, which is what everybody was saying, and that even though there was no snow that night, there were likely katabatic winds, which I'm not sure if you've heard of those.
Mm-mm.
It's another theory. So
Okay.
I'll scroll down to tell you what it is. Katabatic winds is a drainage wind that carries high-density air from a high elevation down a slope. And gravity comes into play with it as well. And so it can rush down an elevated slope at hurricane speeds. Sometimes they're not that strong, but they can blow up to 190 mile per hour winds.
Jeez, that's pretty intense.
They're heavy winds. So they're saying the cut in the snow destabilized the slope, and then there were probably katabatic winds that brought large amount of snow down from higher up towards the campsite, increasing the load on the slope. And so that's why there was such a big delay, because there wasn't a risk until the wind carried down more snow.
Basically, they're just saying it was like the perfect storm of what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And they're like, that's why there was a 9-hour delay between the snow cut and the avalanche, because of the winds. And the simulations that they had also basically showed that it would not have been a huge avalanche. It probably just would have been about 16 feet long, which is about the size of an SUV. And they say that that small size explains why there was no evidence of an avalanche, because it would have filled in the cutout area that they made for the campsite, and then it would have been buried by new snow. Basically, it wasn't enough to like trample the nearby trees or cause a lot of debris, because it just wasn't very big by avalanche standards.
So why didn't it cover the tent? Yeah, it would have.
Well, there's a picture. I don't know if you saw the picture
Yeah,
I put on Instagram.
yeah.
And it does look a little covered, but yeah, it's definitely not like completely covered.
You'd think it would be more than that, though.
Either way, yeah, you would think possibly that the tent would be completely covered then, using that theory.
I would think. And it wouldn't still be standing like it is.
That's true too.
I'm smarter than these scientists.
Oh, stop. But then, do you want to know what I thought was so funny and interesting, and it just like made me laugh?
What?
Okay, so then they tried to figure out how they could explain the traumatic injuries. So guess what they did?
Oh, Lord.
Johan, is that how we said?
Yeah.
So Johan was basically shook by how well movement of snow was depicted in Frozen, the movie. Frozen, the movie.
Lord.
So he decided to ask the animators how they did it. So he went to Hollywood to meet with the specialist who worked on the snow effects on Frozen. And then he modified their snow animation code for his simulation so that they could simulate the impacts that avalanches would have on the human body. Frozen.
I'm sorry, but because they're basing this off of Frozen, I don't think that I can give them any sort of...
No, they're not basing it off of Frozen.
No, I know, but they're
just
basing how they're gonna do the simulation on Frozen.
He was just like, wow, this snow is moving really realistically. I'm going to ask how they did that. And then they used that animation code for their simulations to run their simulations.
That's so trustworthy.
It's just code. It's just animation code. It doesn't impact their science.
I'm very
Judgy.
skeptical.
So then they also found out that GM took 100 cadavers and broke their ribs by hitting them with different weights at different speeds to do like seatbelt tests.
Right.
So they got that. They're able to get their hands on those tests as well. And because GM did some of those tests with people having like rigid back support and like not having rigid back support, and because the skiers on the trip had slept with their skis beneath their bedding, which I can't wrap my head around why you would do that, but sure.
Well, I was gonna say, what are the skis made out of?
I don't know. Let's look at the Instagram again. There's a picture.
I'm trying to be sciencey, but do you think they're wood? So do you think maybe like they have to like when they're done using them, they have to like dry them so that they don't like expand or anything from the wetness?
I have no idea if they're wood. I could look it up, but
No, it's fine.
I'd have to ask.
That's my theory. Is they do that to keep them from like exposure to wet or air,
True,
like
and
cold
you could
air.
also
I don't know.
theorize that like you can't risk leaving them outside overnight because what if they blew away and they're kind of big and there's not really room in the tent to put them anywhere else except for to sleep on them.
That's true.
So there could be that too. But the point is because they had slept with the skis under their bedding, it meant that the avalanche struck like an unusually rigid target as opposed to like, you know, if they weren't and then it was just a body. There's like hard ass skis beneath them. So those factors helped add to the model how a 16-foot long block of snow could, in the very unique situation of them having their bedding on top of their skis, could break ribs and skulls. But
that just seems far-fetched.
I can't really wrap my head around that.
Yeah, me neither.
Like why that makes it possible for it to crush a skull as opposed to if they didn't have their skis beneath their bed. I don't know. I can't really wrap my head around it. But
maybe it's saying, like, since they're laying on something that's pretty sturdy,
yeah,
there's no room for their head to sink in to, like, anything.
True. Yeah,
I don't know.
True. That could be.
I don't know.
But basically, that's how their model
I'm, like,
works.
over here acting it out on this pillow.
You're like, this chair is relatively sturdy. Let me just experiment right here for a second. But, yeah, that's basically how their model worked to try to prove that. And it did. They were able to prove, in their opinion, that avalanche could have caused those injuries because of how they were sleeping. So, now I'm going to tell you the difference between a regular avalanche and a slab avalanche, which you asked earlier.
Yes, I'm curious.
So, slab avalanches have a distinct broad fracture line, and they can only occur when a bonded layer of snow is laying on top of a weak layer of snow. So basically, it's like a block of snow as opposed to just loose snow coming down at you. You know what I mean? When you see an avalanche, it's usually just hella snow.
Yeah.
Like think of Mulan and all
you
that
think
snow
of, like, the
coming
rolling
down.
snow. Yeah.
But a slab avalanche is like a block of firm
like
snow
ice
together.
Snow.
Yeah. It's like a slab or a sheet of snow coming down in one piece.
Kind of like when you clean off your car and it...
Yeah, well...
Like if it's ice rained on top of it or whatever and it gets that solid...
Yeah, it's like
it just comes down in slabs once you cut it, you know.
Yeah, so that's the difference between two kinds of
avalanches.
That makes
sense. Okay.
So they were saying it was a slab avalanche and that it came down and it was small. It was only 16 feet. And that's the T on the difference between them.
Right.
Which I was glad was very easy to understand.
Yeah.
Because I was worried that I was going to be like...
What?
So, ever since because again, Johann and Alexander, this was 2021, so this is recent.
Right.
So basically, if you look up the Dyatlov Pass incident on Google now, it's basically all articles of people thinking it's basically solved now because of that model.
Oh.
It's a lot of scientists saying that these models have now recreated that night accurately enough that they think it's probably what happened.
So the government's doing a good job at covering it up.
But the problem that I have with this too is after this happens, then what they're doing is just guessing basically. So they're saying after that, what they assume happened is they cut themselves out of the smothered tent. They fled in a panic towards temporary shelter in the tree line. 3 were severely injured, but everybody was found outside the tent, which they think likely means that able-bodied survivors dragged the injured out. So they thought there were injured people from the avalanche, obviously.
Wouldn't there be evidence of them dragging them if there was footprints?
Exactly. That's why things never fully make sense.
Right.
Because we talked about the footprints earlier, how it was 9 sets of footprints, how they were all walking. There was no mention of, like, you know, if somebody was carrying somebody even between them, footsteps would be really close together. They would be kind of dragging their feet more if they were helping them walk.
Right, and the imprints would be deeper because they had more weight on them if they were carrying them.
Exactly.
I should have been a fucking investigator.
And then they said that the state of undress was likely paradoxical undressing. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a pretty commonly mentioned thing with hypothermia.
Yeah.
And that the traces of radioactivity in their clothes was probably the thorium, which is present in camping lanterns. And then they said that the soft tissue damage was probably animals. So, my problem with that is that they explain some things with the avalanche, and then they just throw, like, and then this probably happened, and then this probably happened, and then this probably happened.
Right.
But then there's still so many holes.
Yeah.
But the scientists basically say, they're like, it doesn't explain everything, but it explains most of it in a very reasonable way that basically makes sense. So, and then this is the final bit on avalanches, and then we're done. It's basically just, Johan again, and this is Johan in quotes, and he said, "People don't want it to be an avalanche. It's too normal." He thinks that it's too straightforward of an answer to ever be accepted by the public because it's just too normal.
No,
which it's fair. I mean, no fair because
I get what
like it's
saying.
a boring answer after all of the intrigue,
right? But also, like, I need a little bit more tying up loose ends to be convinced.
Yeah, and the last thing I put was
rather than just assumptions.
Yeah, the last thing I put was, yeah, not gonna lie, our podcast is not about normal, but I still think it's sus.
Yeah.
Like, the thing is, I would be really willing to accept avalanche if it literally did hit everything and make it make sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't hit everything. There's always extra stuff that you're like, but that still doesn't make sense. And why would only 2 people's clothes have radioactivity from the camping lanterns? Exactly. That's something else that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I don't know. There's just there's always something. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of makes sense, but it just doesn't, it doesn't hit everything for me. So that's the end of the avalanche theory.
The eyes being gone, almost, it sounds like torture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's a very torturous type of act to get somebody to talk or tell you what they saw, or
yeah. And I don't know. I just feel like you can blame animals, but like, then don't you think there'd be even more gone? Like,
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, they're not just gonna be like,
I'm gonna take the eyeballs.
Oh, an eyeball, ho ho ho, like escargot. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, they're not like fancy. Like, they're gonna eat everything, or a lot of it, to where it looks like an animal.
You'd see more proof of an animal. You wouldn't just see.
You would see claw marks and teeth marks and
I'm not even sure what animals live in that area.
Like, what could get out eyeballs without, like, destroying the face completely?
Yeah, what is picking out eyeballs? Because the only thing I could think of would pick out eyeballs where you wouldn't see traces would be, like, I was going to say, like, a bird, but you'd see proof of, like, pecking at an eyeball.
Right.
Like, even if it's not like a bear, which obviously a bear is not just picking out an eyeball. Just tell me an animal that would pick out an eyeball and you would see no proof of it.
Right.
You can't, because a bigger animal like a bear would have hella damage.
Yeah.
And a smaller animal like a bird, you'd see pecks. Like, you can't, like, there's no way of getting an eyeball out of an eye in one swoop. He's not just pecking it out.
Right. It's weird.
Yeah, so I'm really quickly Googling what animals are in that area because I'm curious. There are buzzards and vultures, but again, pecking. No. Like, the animals to me really, they don't fit on that because it just doesn't make sense.
They would peck at other things too. Unless, like, for some reason their bodies were, like, so cold that they were, like, almost frozen. And, like, their eyes weren't. Because they're inside the body. You know what I mean?
Right, so it's the only thing they could get out.
Like, right. I don't know. I'm really trying to make it
There's Arctic foxes. There's reindeer, ducks, geese,
yeah, I'm pretty,
swan, brown bears, lynx, wolverine, elk.
No.
And none of those, in my opinion, would leave no proof of being there. They would leave some sort of proof. I'm not saying prints in the snow, because obviously that months had passed, but...
Right.
And they were also buried under snow, so there's that to consider, too. How would any animal even get to them?
Right, that's what I'm
Unless
wondering.
You're saying that it was before they were buried under snow. But how does that work?
Right, because, like, if they died from being smothered... and it's not like it got warm enough for the snow to melt, because it's cold up there all the time.
Well, so...
I mean, it does get warmer, but
when they were found in May, they were found in running water.
Oh, okay.
Which means, like, there was a creek that was frozen when they were there that did melt enough to be an actual creek when they were found. So there is, like, melting that happens, but they were, the snow on top of them didn't all melt. I mean, they had to excavate them out. So, yeah, I mean, even if it got a little warmer enough for the creek to melt, it's not like all the snow on top of them were melted.
Right.
So, yeah, like, animals doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
We're going on an animal rant, but it doesn't make sense.
No.
So, now we're moving on to katabatic winds, like we brought up earlier. This is kind of quick, because obviously I already explained to everybody that that's like it's a drainage wind. It goes from high density, down elevation, using gravity, and they can go down elevated slopes up to 190 miles per hour. They are pretty rare, but they can be very violent, and they were implicated in the 1978 case in the Anaris Mountains in Sweden, where 8 hikers were killed and 1 was severely injured because of a katabatic wind. And the topography of that location and where they were in the Ural Mountains at Dyatlov were very similar.
Okay.
There was it was similar topography, so obviously if it could happen there, it could likely happen there as well.
I want to compare the damage, though.
I know, right? And it stated that a sudden katabatic wind would have made it impossible to remain in the tent, and the most rational course of action would have been to cover the tent with snow, I'm assuming so it doesn't blow away, and then seek shelter behind the tree line. And it said at the top of the tent there was a torch that was left on, and they thought it was potentially left on so the hikers could find their way back once the wind subsided. And then hikers then constructed 2 shelters, one of which collapsed, leaving 4 of the hikers buried with the severe injuries observed. So that's how they thought that happened. So there was a wind, they had to leave, they went to the forest, they made some shelters, 1 collapsed on them, and that's how the 4 had their serious injuries. And that's basically the extent of that theory. Which explains even less, in my opinion.
Right, yeah.
Like, the wind, I understand that as a theory, but I don't think it explains anything else.
No.
And I do think that the tent would have blown away. I don't think they would have thought to cover it in snow to keep it from blowing away. If it was that high, if that was that intense of a wind, you would just yeet. You would not.
Yeah, I wouldn't even.
You wouldn't think about covering the tent. You would just be like, gotta get out of here before I literally blow away.
Right.
So, that's that theory. And now, we moved on to the Kármán vortex sheet. Do you want to know what that is?
Yeah.
So, that's a hypothesis that was popularized by Donnie Aker in his 2013 book called Dead Mountain. And that theory basically states that the wind going around the mountain created a Kármán vortex sheet, which is, you might have heard of it, is like an infrasound capable of inducing panic attacks in humans. So this is brought up a lot when you talk about this, like a wind that has such a strange sound that it makes people go kind of crazy.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard that.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Oh. Well, basically the theory states that the infrasound generated by the wind passed over the top of the mountain, and it can cause mental distress and physical discomfort. And Johnny, because we're on a first name basis, he basically states that because of their panic, they were driven to leave the tent by whatever means necessary and fled down the slope. And by the time they were further down, they would have been out of the infrasound's path and they would have regained their composure, but in the darkness it would have been hard to return to their shelter. And then he states that the traumatic injuries suffered by the victims, the heavy traumatic ones, like the chest, like the crushed chest and the crushed skull, was the result of them stumbling over the edge of a ravine in the darkness and landing on the rocks at the bottom. It's another theory that basically no theory covers everything. If you're starting to get that, every single one checks some boxes, but no theory checks all of them. And that's kind of the problem with this incident. Is it's one of these things where we're never going to know. Because we weren't there, and we're just never going to have the answer. Because it could have been a very specific set of circumstances. Maybe it was a slab avalanche, and then maybe something
woke up the yetis.
Yeah, and then maybe something very specific happened, and the yetis came. It just seems like it's a combination of things, and we're never going to know.
Right.
You know how sometimes people ask if you could know the answer to one true crime / unexplained thing in the world, what would it be? This is mine. Really? Yeah, I think it is.
I don't know.
A lot of people say JonBenet Ramsey.
But we know what happened.
Do we?
I do.
Oh, okay. I think it was the brother.
Don't sue us. But yeah.
See, you don't have to sue us because I'm not sure. But
I think it was an accident.
Yeah, but the point is a lot of people's number one thing that they would like to know exactly what happened, know the truth. A lot of people say John Bonet, but I say this. I would love to know the truth. People say, like, if you could go back in time and witness something and figure out what happened, what would it be? And I feel like if you could go back to that past, but, like, in like a Bran from Game of Thrones way, where, like, you're not in danger of the Yeti or the avalanche, and
the
you're just...
three-eyed raven.
You're just watching, it would be this for me. 100%. Do you know what yours would be?
I don't.
I'll let you think about it.
I always have, like... There's always questions that I think about.
Yeah.
Like, what I want to know, but... I don't know.
We'll come back. Think about that until on Sunday when we record next.
Okay.
Then you give me an answer. And everybody else, tell us.
Yeah.
If you have a one unexplained or, like, true crime thing where if you could go back in time and witness it and figure out the truth in a way that you were not in danger, what would it be? And that's mine. It's this. Because I just feel like it's very specific series of events that we're never going to know.
Yeah.
We're just never going to know. But yeah, so that's the Karman vortex sheet. It's the infrared sound that can induce panic attacks and mental distress. And now we're moving on to military tests.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. This is what you've been waiting for, right?
Yep.
So in this theory, they think that the campsite basically fell within the path of a Soviet parachute mine exercise, and that the hikers were woken up by loud explosions, so they fled the tent in a shoeless panic, and then they found themselves unable to return for their supplies. So then it says that some members froze to death attempting to endure the bombardment of just, like, explosions happening. And so that's when they started to, like, take each other's clothing of the people who had died so that they could try to stay warm. And then it is said that then some of the other ones were then killed by concussions, or, like, basically more of the parachute mines exploding, and it killed them. And there are records of parachute mines being tested by the Soviet military in that area around that time.
Okay.
And parachute mines also detonate while they're still in the air rather than actually striking the Earth's surface. So they can produce similar injuries to those experienced by the hikers, with heavy internal damage with very little external damage, which we talked about last time.
I could see them getting, like, the superficial, like, scratches and burns and stuff from it. I could.
Well, there's not a lot of external trauma with these bombs, but...
No, but, like, I mean, when something explodes and there's stuff around...
That's true. And in their panicking and trying to get away, that could also explain some of the scratches and stuff.
Yeah.
So this theory also coincides with reported sightings of glowing orange orbs that were floating or falling in the sky within that vicinity around that time. Because I haven't mentioned that, but there were orbs that people spotted, which goes into some other theories later on. But people think, well, that could have been military aircrafts or the descending parachute mines that they saw in the sky. And then this theory also states, though, that animals explained the rest of the injuries. Basically, no theory can fully explain the injuries of, like, eyeballs and stuff like that being missing. So they all basically just say animals, which still doesn't line up to me. So then there was also speculation that the bodies seemed unnaturally manipulated, and there was livor mortis, as we spoke about in part 1 as well, and burns to the hair and skin. And then photographs also showed, and some people stated that the tent was erected incorrectly, something that they were unlikely to have done themselves. So basically stating that people had then come afterwards, like, obviously probably the Soviet, like, government, because they were the ones doing the tests in this theory, that they had come afterwards to try to sort of manipulate the scene, and there was no proof of there being any involvement.
Yeah.
Which is why bodies were moved and why the tent was allegedly set up incorrectly, etc.
Right. Because they wouldn't set it up right or wrong.
No, they absolutely wouldn't have set it up wrong. So, along the same lines, there's also a theory of testing of radiological weapons, and that theory is basically partially made because of the radioactivity that was found on some of the clothing. But also because of, like we said earlier, the descriptions by relatives of some of the bodies having like orange skin or like orange or like dark skin. And also some people stated that their hair had like turned gray. So they were saying this seems like proof that like something sus was going on like with radioactivity.
Right.
But anti-radioactivity theory, people state that it would have affected all of them, not just some of them. And obviously, there's only radioactivity found on 2 people. And that some of the skin and hair discoloration can be explained by natural, like, mummification. Because they were in the cold and the wind for 3 months. Since the ones with radioactivity and with the orange skin were mostly, I think, the ones found later.
Yeah.
Though I think it was all of them to an extent, but mostly I think they're speaking of obviously the ones found later. Right, and then further proof that there was something sus going on is, like I said earlier, how it went to a secret archive, basically. The fact that a lot of the files were initially suppressed made people think that there was a cover-up. But anti-that theory is that concealment of information about domestic incidents was basically standard procedure for the USSR at that time, so it wasn't strange for it to have been made private. Like, that wasn't out of the ordinary for them to have done.
Okay.
So it wasn't considered
Well, maybe it's weird. Because they do sketchy shit all the time.
I mean, maybe, but it says all domestic incidents are basically always made private, and it's highly unlikely that every single thing is sketchy.
Right.
But fair. But basically they're saying it's not that strange for that to have made private, and since the 1980s, all of the files have now been released, so they're not even private anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. So then, Yuri Yudin, the third Yuri, the one who turned around and had to go back, he maintained until he died that it was not natural whatever happened. He thinks that they were taken from the tent at gunpoint and murdered, and he said that he thinks that Dubinina may have had her tongue cut out by the killers because she was the most outspoken of the group, so she could have been like talking back, and that's why she got her tongue cut out. So basically that's somebody who was there, that was in the area. Like he wasn't all the way up there with them, but he was with them. And I mean, I feel like if anybody should have an opinion of what happened, is of somebody who very easily could have been there
and knew them
and knew the area they were going. Like he says he doesn't, I mean, he's somebody who hiked, so it'd be very easy for him to be like, it was an avalanche.
Right.
But he doesn't think it was an avalanche. He thought that they got murdered. And then another pro-weapons test theory basically cites that people in the region, like I said, had seen flashes of lights or moving balls of fire in the direction of the mountains. And also in 2008, a 3-foot-long piece of metal was found in the area. And according to Dyatlov Foundation, who ended up taking possession of it, that metal was part of a Soviet ballistic missile. And again, it would explain the radioactivity. And then Yevgeny Okshev, who was a supervisor in the Prosecutor General's office, gave an interview in 2013. In that interview, he basically recalled he thought it was super suspicious that he was instructed at all to test recovered items for radiation. He's like, why would we even be looking for radiation? And so he sent a letter to his superiors asking why it was relevant. And in response, the deputy prosecutor general met with the team, and that he basically dodged questions about weapons testing and ordered them to tell people that the deaths were accidental. And Yevgeny basically, and this is in quotes, said, "The victims' parents came to my office. Some screamed and called us fascists for hiding the truth from them. But the case was closed and not on our orders." So, that's a little sketchy. But the final little anti-weapons testing theory on that is basically that it's just not consistent with the scene. So as we said earlier with the Mansi people and how it was like, despite the fact that it was just people being horrible and just assuming the people they didn't understand were responsible, but there was only the 9 footprints. There was no proof of anyone else being around, and so no one would have been there to like erase signs of the people and equipment involved in killing the group. There was no way they could have restaged the scene without there being proof that they were there. And then also basically just the thought of like, if you were going to stage a scene, why would you make it so weird?
Right.
Like, why are you cutting out eyeballs and tongues and like,
yeah, it doesn't make
taking
sense.
off clothes, or like basically everything that happened was so extra.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't do that if you were staging it. You would want to make it look more cohesive and like realistic.
So people don't ask questions.
Exactly. So yeah, they basically said like, why would you scatter the bodies around the landscape? Why would you cut off clothing of some? Why would you dress others in it? Because remember, people were wearing other people's clothes.
Right.
So, like,
right.
Why would you build a snow den and bury 4 bodies? Why would you light a fire, climb a tree to break branches, to leave skin on the bark? Like,
right.
Why would you do any of that? It's extra. It's too much.
Yeah. I don't think the whole thing was set up. I think only certain things were.
And then the final part of that theory is basically just if there was a secret weapons base in the area, and now there's like a mass declassification of documents from the Soviet era, and there's no evidence that there's a weapons base in that area, and it's basically all been declassified. So there would be evidence that something was there if there was.
Unless they moved it.
Or unless it's still there and they don't want anyone to know.
Mm-hmm.
Or, not saying it's being used, but like maybe it is still there just in case. Or maybe they just don't want people to know about what happened then. I mean, I don't know.
It's very mysterious.
It's very mysterious. Okay, so you remember earlier when we were talking about how Sasha, like, his DNA didn't match any of his living relatives?
Yeah.
And it was posited that possibly maybe somebody was using his identity.
Right.
And you, like, had a whole theory, and I said, oh, you're not too off track from a theory later. We're on that theory now.
Okay.
So, there were 2 members of the Dyatlov group that have been focused on for, like, some sus behavior. Not, like, sus behavior, but, like, things where they could kind of look at it and be like, interesting. And one of them was Sasha. So basically because Sasha was like a veteran of World War II and he was attached to a group of young students and graduates, he was just a random addition to the group.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it didn't really make sense that he was there.
Right.
And since he was a veteran and since like DNA didn't match him, people were just like, it's just odd that he's with that group.
Yeah.
And then there's also Yuri. This is the Yuri Krivonashenko Yuri. He actually helped clear up a radioactive leak at a secret Soviet nuclear facility in 1957 because he was working there, and there was a leak, and it's known as the Kishtium disaster. That's how I'm going to pronounce that. And so basically, he had like some experience with radioactivity and like secret nuclear facilities.
What if they were on a mission?
And Sasha was a veteran of World War II that didn't really fit in with that group. So basically, in that theory, Yuri and Sasha were working for the KGB, and they had joined the trek to rendezvous with CIA agents in the Ural Mountains. And while they were handing over radioactive materials and fake nuclear secrets, the Russians were supposed to take photos of the American agents, and that the theory goes on to say that the CIA kind of got wise, and so a fight broke out, and that massacred the party. So basically that they were doing like, they were pretending to help the CIA and they were going to hand over fake information, and
right.
And then like Americans caught wise and there was like a fight that broke out. And then like you said earlier, then the rest of the group would have just been collateral damage.
Right.
So that's what they call the espionage theory.
I like it.
Well, I think it's kind of a little bit of a
It is,
leap,
but it's fun.
But yeah, so that's that theory. And then, of course, there is hypothermia and paradoxical undressing, which basically is just stating they died from hypothermia, and the hypothermia caused them to have paradoxical undressing, which, if you don't know, is what happens if someone's like highly hypothermic and they're so hypothermic they feel hot.
Yeah, and
they start to like have a burning warmth because they're so cold. So they remove their clothes because they are feeling like they're hot, not cold, basically. So since it's basically undisputed that 6 of them died of hypothermia, they're just thinking, well, they had hypothermia and that's why they took their clothes off and that's what happened. That's just a little addition. Which,
meh.
which my problem with that theory is I just feel like it's highly unlikely that so many of them would get that all at the same time.
Right.
Like, that's not a thing that happens every single time you have hypothermia. It's a thing that can happen. So what are the odds that it happened to
all of them?
Almost all of them?
Yeah.
It just doesn't really seem that likely.
Mm-mm.
And I think it's far more likely that whatever it was happened while they were sleeping, and so they didn't have time to get dressed.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Miara thinks they should have slept in their clothes.
Yeah. I do. I stand by that statement.
She stands by that statement. So, circling back around to the orbs that we talked about earlier, I said that they were brought back in another theory, and they are. So, those orbs were observed in that area during the period from February to March of 1959 by various independent witnesses, including the meteorology service and the military. So, people were seeing them. They weren't just like one person seeing it. A bunch of different people saw some orbs.
Right.
And they were not noted in the 1959 investigation. The witnesses came forward years later. So, some people think it meant that it was aliens. So, a former police officer who led the inquest in 1959, he published an article later with his admission that his team had had no rational explanation for the incident. He also stated that his team had been told they'd seen those flying spheres, and he had gotten direct orders from a high-ranking official to dismiss the claim. So, people saw orbs, and he was told, ignore the orbs. Aliens? Question mark? Could be. Could be aliens. And then, in 1990, Lev Ivanov was a man who led the initial investigation into the incident. He published a sensationalized article claiming that he'd been told he had to censor some of his key findings, including char marks on the trees near where the bodies were found. And in his view, they were confirmed a source of a heat ray. So, aliens have heat rays.
Interesting.
So, he thinks it was a heat ray. He also alleged that his article also alleged that floating balls of light and other weird phenomena had been reported. And he said, in quotes, based on the evidence gathered, the role of UFOs in this tragedy was quite obvious. So he's saying there's a heat ray, there were orbs, it was aliens.
Interesting.
Aliens.
You never know.
Aliens. I mean, he was told he had to censor some of his findings.
Yeah.
Sort of sus. Kind of sketchy.
It is.
And then finally,
what if all of the mysteries in the world was just summed up to aliens? Like, it was.
I mean, aliens is always a theory of basically everything.
Right, the aliens just fucking with us. Like, let's see how many questions we can get them to ask.
I mean, if you watch any BuzzFeed Unsolved episode, Ryan always used to have one theory that said aliens at the end of every single crime episode, basically. So guess what we're on now?
Aliens.
No, guess what we're on now?
What? Yetis?
It's Yeti time.
It's Yeti time!
So, basically, what is mostly considered the most entertaining theory, yeah, it's not taken very seriously, it's the most entertaining theory,
That's right.
is that the party was attacked by a Yeti. So, there is a photograph on Thibaut Brignol's camera that has become famous because it is a dark figure advancing through the forest that looks like a Yeti.
See, there it is.
But a lot of people say, no, this is very clearly just a member of the group, kind of from far away, wearing a lot of snow clothes.
No, it's a Yeti.
Hold on, I'm going to pull up the picture for you.
I think it's a Yeti.
You haven't even seen the picture
I
yet.
don't even care. I think it's a Yeti.
You have to see the picture.
Where? Oh, it's a Yeti.
You heard it here first. Miara says it's a Yeti.
Or a Bigfoot. Which is...
basically a Yeti.
Basically.
I'm not sure what the difference is between the two, but it's basically a Yeti.
Yeah.
Okay. So... that's the photo I've showed you. I'll put it on the Instagram. Go check it out. Tell us if you think it's a Yeti or a person. And what's funny is the skiers had actually been joking about Yetis a few hours before they died. They had found a spoof propaganda leaflet. At some point, it was found in the tent. And it basically said on the funny little pamphlet, "Science. In recent years, there had been heated debate about the existence of the Yeti. Latest evidence indicates that the Yeti lives in the northern Urals near Mount Oriton," which is where they were.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's all there is to the Yeti theory. There's that picture, and that's
believe
basically it.
I believe it. And he had like one of those little cocktail forks, and that's what he got their eyes out with. Like, with shrimp, or crab forks.
Yeah, I know exactly what kind of fork you're talking about. You know I love crab.
Makes sense.
So yeah, that's it. That's all of the theories that I have.
It's a Yeti.
Miara thinks that the most viable theory is the theory where the only evidence is a picture in a pamphlet. It's a joke pamphlet saying that there's Yetis there.
Bioengineered Yeti.
Well, yeah, that's...
with a baseball bat.
Yeah, that's just the Miara theory, basically. So yeah, that's it.
That's it.
So you think Yeti?
Yeti.
That's really what you think? You think Yeti?
No. I think it had something to do with the government.
Okay.
And I don't know if somebody was involved or something like in their personal life, but I feel like maybe even the trip was disguised as a trip, but really it was for some sort of mission.
Right.
With whoever, whether it be
Sasha
Sasha and Yuri or whoever. And I think that the mission didn't go as planned. And I think some of them may have been spooked by something and they did die from hypothermia. But the ones that really got mutilated were the ones that saw something and they were tortured to death.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit of everything.
And that's kind of how I feel like when I'm saying if I could go back and witness anything and see exactly what happened, it'd be this, because I feel like it is a little bit of a lot of things.
This is one of those things that, like, you literally won't find out.
Because no theory is going to hit everything, because it just could have been anything, any combination,
whereas,
things we're not even thinking of.
You have, like, true crime murders and stuff. Those can always have some potential to be figured out because of, like, forensics and stuff and the, like, movement forward in that.
Right, like technology.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, there's literally we're never, ever, ever gonna know.
Right.
Ever.
I'd like to know who the Zodiac Killer is.
That's yours?
Maybe.
I'm not judging you if it is. That's a good one.
That's a pretty legit one for me.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good one.
Kind of makes me wonder.
Because that's still that could be solved. Like, that's not out of the woods that's not one of those where you're like, nope, we're never going to know like this. Like, you could figure that one out one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe you will. Maybe you'll get your answer, but I never will.
I don't think so.
We're never going to know.
No.
Because I don't even know what I think. Nope, I don't even know. Because nothing works perfectly.
No.
Even every part of the avalanche thing that works is too easy, and it doesn't solve the rest. And anytime they blame scavenging animals, it doesn't make sense.
Are a part of it.
Because why? They would take more. Like, they would be chomping on way more than just tongues and eyeballs if there were animals. We looked up what animals are there.
What if there was a little bit of everything? What if there was, like, a slab avalanche?
Okay.
Which, like, caused them to run off, but they were also part of a mission.
Okay.
Like, a couple of them were. And the hike, anyway, was just a cover for it.
Okay.
And then when they were running, they split up somehow.
Okay.
And the ones that got mutilated stumbled upon something. And then, like I said, they were tortured to death and killed.
I kind of like that. I kind of, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah, a little bit of everything.
And again, okay, I like that, but then I just wanted to also bring up, again, like, blaming animals. But then why were the other bodies had nothing? Like, the ones found under the tree, and then the three found back to the camp, there was no soft tissue damage at all. If there were animals around, they would have gotten to every single body, and those other bodies that had no soft tissue damage were easier to get to than the ones buried under snow.
Right.
Like, they were all up on, like, easily accessible terrain, and animals would have gotten to them before they got to ones buried under snow. So that just, again, further proves that animals doesn't make sense. No. I like your theory. I think that's the theory I'm going with.
Yeah. I'm going to write it down, send it in, and then
Because I do think
if I mysteriously die, it's Putin. He's like, damn, she's too smart for her own good. She's done.
I think he probably has more important things to do than.
Wow.
He's too busy invading
Unless
countries.
I'm on to something. I'm just kidding.
Putin listening to this podcast from a military base in the Ural Mountains as they're doing tests.
Yeah.
Like, oh fuck, they know.
She figured it out. That's right.
But no, yeah, I kind of do think it was a combo of things like that, and I agree. I think that it could have been a combination. Like then they stumbled upon something, which is why their bodies were like that. Whereas the other ones were just normal, kind of like hypothermic deaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah.
We solved it. We solved it. Miara solved it.
Yep. It's not a mystery anymore.
Mm.
It's not even relevent anymore for our podcast.
Yes, it's
I already figured it out.
It's no longer mysterious because we figured it out. Anyway, yeah, I think I just thought this was a good one to cover. It's interesting. It's spooky.
I remembered hearing it for the first time on Morbid, and I was like, man, I've never heard about this, but I was like tuned in, like so interested because it's so weird.
It's so weird.
It's like bizarre.
I kind of want to listen to their episode again now and see if I missed anything.
I'm pretty sure it's one of their earlier ones, like within the first 10.
Could be. I might listen to it, and then I'm going to be mad if I missed something. But I had 20 pages of research, so I
you
feel
did
kind
you
of good
did
about
your
myself.
due diligence.
Sorry if this was a lot, everybody. And I feel like kind of the explanations of the theories kind of got a little chaotic, but
it's
we got
fine.
there. We got there in the end.
So, yeah.
So that's it. So thanks for listening. Follow us on our socials. Again, if you leave us a review on Apple Store or wherever you listen, we'll read it out loud next episode and hype you up. So leave us some reviews and you can get some airtime. We have a Google form now. If you want to suggest cases, it's on our link tree. So you can get them up there. It's super easy. You just click it and a box will come up on a little page. You just type it in and then send it and we get it.
And also, Morgan's going to post a poll on social media. Well, would it be a poll?
I don't know because I don't know what you're talking about.
About, like, what you would want to see solved. Like, if you could...
Oh, about my little question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I am kind of curious, so I will maybe post a poll or something. Or
something along those
just
lines.
What thing, if you could go back and watch it and solve it, and it's not just know the answer, it is literally go back like Bran from Game of Thrones and witness it safely, because again, I'm not trying to go witness an avalanche and then die back in time. That's really awkward.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you could go back and watch something and solve it, what would it be? I'll put a poll up.
As if you were, like, watching a movie.
No, like Bran from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, but, like...
No, he's not watching it. He was in it. He's in the movie.
No, I know, but, like...
Nope.
It's like a dream.
Like a dreamscape.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So, that's it.
That's it. Hope you enjoyed it. This was a doozy.
Thank you.
And lighter. I mean, not really, like... I mean, it's sad about the people that passed, and it was horrific how they... Like, their bodies were mutilated and things, but...
It's a little lighter than people cutting bodies up and murdering them.
And boys being tortured.
And before that, insane asylum people being tortured. Yeah. And before that, more people being cut up. Because we've been kind of niche lately with our the Dozier School and then the Trans-Allegheny, and then we had Monster of Florence and Cleveland. We've been kind of niche. Sorry, guys.
What does that say about us?
I don't know. I don't really know how that happened, but we're going to try to be more aware of...
Mine will be different next time.
Yeah, we're going to try to be more aware of each other's topics so that we don't get into a little... Because I do feel like those four all had some similar vibes and we did them really close together. Yeah. So we're going to try to not do that in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all very interesting. I just feel like they could have been spread out in a way that made it not sort of similar stuff
We're
altogether.
still learning. We're new.
We are, but this was very different than everything else.
Yes, it was.
And yours is too. And I don't know my next one yet, but...
Me neither. I haven't decided.
Well, you're always ahead of me. Anyway, okay, off topic. So, well, it's not off topic, but we won't go on another ramble when this is already, like...
2 hours long.
What?
An hour and 51 minutes.
Oh my gosh, this is our longest recording ever. Ooh.
I'll probably get it down to like an hour and 30, but
Yeah, probably. Okay, so yeah, that's it.
all right. So thanks for listening.
And we are
Mysteriosities.
That was a really, really